Hey, now am I on? Okay, fine. We're looking at Joshua chapter 12. I have this habit of trying to, or I like to kind of go back. We're working our way through the book of Joshua, and last week we looked at Joshua chapter 11. And so I thought I would recap just for a minute Joshua chapter 11. Also, if anybody's got any questions, raise your hand and we'll talk about them. Joshua chapter 11 was, I wonder if I did that wrong. Actually, it's Joshua chapter 10 that I was going to recap. I've got this kind of, excuse me. Joshua chapter 10 talks about how the southern kingdom, the cities of the southern kingdom have all been taken. At the end of chapter 10, it talks about how they finished all these, they finished conquering all the cities of the south, and then they went back to their camp at Gilgal. The last verse of chapter 10 says, "Then Joshua returned with all of Israel and camped at Gilgal." Now, last week, you looked at chapter 11. Is that right, Ralphie? Yes. Okay. I'm sorry, I wasn't goofed up. So chapter 11 talks about how they start to take the kingdoms of the north. So they talk about, we went through it a bunch, and God was with them, and a bunch of the cities in the north have heard, the Israelites have been awfully successful taking the cities of the south. So the cities of the north have heard about this, and so they're expecting them to come. And the king of one of them, he says, Jabin, the king of Hazor, heard this, and he sent word to the various other kings, and they all decided to join forces, and they met at the waters of Merom. And I thought it might be kind of good to go over this a little bit on the map, because these places still exist. That's one of the things that I think is kind of exciting about this. Like I tell people, this is not like Narnia. This place really exists. It's not made up, and most of these things you can find. So, I will. This is a whole map. Here's the Mediterranean Sea over here, and there's the Dead Sea. You can always identify this pretty easy this way. And so, if we were to zoom in here, and I think I can do that in a minute once I figure out how. So, Jericho, which is not really shown on the map because this map was theoretically for the time after Joshua, and so Jericho is no more, so it's not shown there. But Gilgal is here. This is Beth Gilgal, and that's just where they were camped. They were camped here, and they had taken a bunch of these. Here's Gibeon. That's where the tribes were that made the agreement. They remember back 2 or 3 chapters in Joshua ago, they faked out like they were from a foreign land, and they got to sign the agreement with the Israelites. That was at Gibeon. But then all the rest of these cities, there's several of them if you were to go over and study this map real carefully, and you'd recognize them from chapter 10. In chapter 11, they basically turned their emphasis toward the north. So we'll go up to the north a little bit. And as we read the early part of chapter 11, a bunch of these kings got together and says, we've got to stop these Israelites before they come get us. And so they all met together up here. This is Merom, and this river right here is called the waters of Merom, strangely enough. So that's where they all met here in chapter 11, and that's the Sea of Galilee. They call it the Kinneret, but it's the Sea of Galilee, and we've been there. We've seen that, right? It is kind of a nice valley, and you can imagine the guy that initiated this in chapter 11 went over to 4 or 5 of the different communities around here, different cities, and talked them all into joining them. And so they all met there. And if you remember from last week, you read chapter 11, God had told Joshua to, don't worry, don't be fearful, because I'm with you, and you'll take them. So the Israelites did a preemptive strike on all the kings that were at the waters of Merom and basically annihilated them. So that's really essentially kind of what happened. After that, they went on to various other cities in the northern kingdom and conquered them. Like I said, I don't want to go back over chapter 11 because you did that. But I think there's a couple of important points to make. You might call, they mopped up in the north. You know, they went and this was the major battle was right up front when they did this preemptive strike and got rid of like 4 or 5 armies all at the same time. But then they went from city to city, doing exactly what God told them to do, conquering and killing everybody. If you look, the last verse of chapter 11 says, "So Joshua took the entire land, just as Yahweh had directed Moses, and he gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to the tribal divisions. Then the land had a rest from war." So essentially at the end of chapter 11, most of the conquering is done. So the book of Joshua, you know, is about Joshua leading the Israelites across the Jordan and conquering the land that God had promised to the Israelites. And so as we sit here at the beginning of chapter 12, he's pretty much conquered most of the stuff that God had promised. I mean, we'll find out if there's some things he hadn't done yet and a few little details, but by and large, at the end of chapter 11, that's where he's at. That's the state of things. The Israelites have been incredibly successful. And it's been because God's been with them. You can read that in chapter 11 several times. So we'll start with chapter 12. By the way, well, this map, I got it offline. If you want to go look at it online, I can give you the URL for it. You can go look at all this. Sometimes I get lost in this and spend hours, you know, roaming around looking and stuff because I think it's really fun. Like I say, the fact that this really exists. So, does somebody want to read the beginning of chapter 12? The first 6 verses? It's still on, but you have to turn the little mute switch on the bottom. Yeah, aha. Okay, the first 6 verses to the end of verse 6.
Joshua 12, 1. Now these are the kings of the land which the children of Israel smote and possessed their land on the other side Jordan toward the rising of the sun from the river Arnon unto Mount Hermon and all the plain on the east. Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who dwelt in Heshbon and ruled from Aroer, which is upon the bank of the river Arnon, and from the middle of the river, and from half Gilead, even into the river Jabbok, which is the border of the children of Ammon. And from the plain to the sea of Kinnerot on the east, and into the sea of the plain, even the salt sea of the east, the way to Bet Heshmot, and from the south under Ashdod Pisgah, and the coast of Og, king of Bashan, which was of the remnant of the giants that dwelt at Ashtaroth and Edrei, and reigned in Mount Hermon and in Salca, in all Bashan, into the border of the Geshurites, and the Maacathites, and half Gilead, the border of Sihon, king of Heshbon. Verse 6. Them did Moses, the servant of Yahweh, and the children of Israel smite. And Moses, the servant of Yahweh, gave it for a possession unto the Reubenites and the Gadites and half the tribe of Manasseh.
Okay, now here's the $64,000 question. See if any of you have been paying attention at all. So, does anybody recognize this and when this happened? Have you seen these guys before? Does Og, the king of Bashan, and Sihon, the king of the Amorites, mean anything to you?
Deuteronomy or Numbers?
Is it Numbers? Good.
I don't know.
That's good. Beg your pardon? I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. Yep, that was the guy with the big bed. Can you remember the circumstances that went on at this point in time? What was going on here? Okay, first of all, Moses was still alive, right? And the Israelites were...
Did they come down and attack or something?
No, the Israelites were basically tromping along up here. Can you see that arrow okay? You know, tromping along up here, coming up the east side of the Jordan River, and they talked about the Arnon. The Arnon River is right here, and the Jabbok River is right here. And we've been to this Arnon River. It's an amazing thing, because up here on top, which is where the Israelites would have been, you're on this big plateau. And you come to the edge of this plateau, and it's way down there. I mean, it's not like Grand Canyon way down there, but it's not dissimilar. And you drive down this road back and forth on these switchbacks, and you get to the bottom, and you cross the Arnon River, which is, calling it a river is kind of generous. But in the desert, anything that runs water, you call a river. And so you kind of cross this little creek, and then you go winding all the way back at the top, and then you're at the same level you were when you started. It's a very notable thing. And what does it say here? It says that the Arnon River, the Arnon Gorge, from the middle of the gorge to the Jabbok River, and this was the land of the Amorites. Ammonites. I'm sorry, the border of, okay, the Jabbok was the border with the Ammonites. These were the Amorites. And you remember, Moses led the Israelites, and they conquered that. Okay? Go on, John.
The Jabbok, isn't that where Esau meets up with Jacob?
Yep.
With Jacob?
Yep.
Okay.
When Jacob left Laban and came down, he camped out one night right here on the banks of the Jabbok River, and that's when he sent his guys ahead and said, go see if you can find Esau. Tell him I'm coming to visit. And they said, yeah, we found Esau, and he's coming with 400 guys. You remember that whole story? That was the Jabbok River. Yep, that's where the double camps were. That's where he had the wrestling match. That's where he got his name, is all right there, okay? So anyway, back in Moses' time now, this is when the first guy they took was this Bashan, or Sihon, the king of the Amorites. And then if you cross the Jabbok River and go up north, then you come on to the land of Og and Bashan up here. And you know, they had a battle at Edrei, and Edrei, you can see Edrei over here. Right there is the city of Edrei. Let me grab that, see if I can pull that down just a little bit. Now you can see that Edrei is over here just east of the Sea of Galilee. And so this was the area that Og, the king of Bashan, took. Now, okay, just a second. So the Israelites, under Moses, before he died, took all this land. John.
Well, I was just going to say that.
Okay.
So at this point, Ephraim, half the tribe of Manasseh, Ephraim, Reuben, half the tribe of Manasseh have essentially got their land.
But, okay, yep.
Before Joshua.
Yep. It
Before his
wasn't.
campaign.
Well, let's recall the story, because the story is really pretty good. I think it
wasn't that they.
Is Gad, Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh.
What did I say?
You said Ephraim.
Right, you're right.
Okay. Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh went to Moses, and they said, you know, we like this land. This is pretty cool stuff. We think we just stay here. If you guys want to cross the Jordan, go right ahead. And remember, Moses got pretty upset. He said, you can't do that. You know, he was recalling back to the 10 spies thing, and he says, we're all in this together. You know, you can't do that. You have to. We're all one kingdom. And so the leaders from those tribes said, no, you misunderstand. We're not saying we won't go with you. We're saying we want this land. So Moses said, okay, if you promise that you'll go over with the rest of the Israelites and help the rest of the Israelites conquer the land that I have set aside for them, that is the land on the west side of the Jordan, fine. When the war's over, when you've conquered all that land, you guys can come back here
So they
and,
rented out
and
some
settle this land.
They rented out some storage units on that side and put all their stuff in it while
Yep.
they went to.
Yeah, that's right. They went to a rental place and they rented the storage units and set all their stuff there.
It's
Well,
in the
they
Bible.
really did say that their children and their cattle and flocks could stay.
So this is all after. I'm sorry to.
That's fine. No, this
This
is
is
what I
all
want to
after
talk
the
about.
evil report. This is at the very end of the 40 years.
Yep.
In the desert, Moses is still alive.
Yep.
He's still eating them.
Yep.
So they've done that part.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, and that's what this is talking about. See, what they're doing here in chapter
So
12.
he's only reviewing maybe something that happened a year before that or 2 years?
Yep,
Okay.
a few years, but not very many.
Okay.
Yeah, and the point is, and the reason that's here, is he's describing everything that went on into the, in the time of taking all this land. Yeah. Yeah, but I wasn't going to. You're right, they are. So this is cheating. This is looking ahead. Here's the land. Half of Manasseh ends up with, it's not the half tribe of Manasseh, it's half of the tribe of Manasseh. So half of the Manassites said they wanted the land here, and here's the Gadites, and if we go down here, here's the Reubenites. So those three tribes, or those 2.5 tribes, wanted land that was on the east side of the Jordan River. Rafi?
Something to me, I think is just, I'm noticing it right now, but in a major aspect is even theological would be, we have Moses and Yahushua are part in taking the land.
Yes.
Here. You know, where there's not this separation between Moses and, say, Messiah. You know, I mean, if we bring it on to today, Moses was just as important with the land as Joshua or Yahushua. So to me, I see these two characters are together, are echad, in the promised land here and the promised land in the kingdom to come, so to speak.
I think that's a good point. That's a good point. God intends his people to be united, right? Yep. Yep.
Who would do that, Ralph? Who would throw
Who
away
would
the
do
Torah
that?
without...
Yeah, who would do that? Okay, so the main thing I wanted to point out there is, if you've read that, and believe me, you have to go through this several times before you finally get to where you can recognize that. But I mean, if you've read it a few times, then you recognize, well, haven't I heard about Sihon before? Where did I hear about him? And haven't I heard about this Og guy? And then you think and you remember, oh yeah, that was Numbers back there at the end of Numbers, you know? And you start connecting dots like that. The Bible doesn't make it easy for you to connect the dots, but you can connect the dots. And now you understand what Moses, or what Joshua was writing about here. He says, okay, let's go back to the beginning and see how all this land came about. And so that's what he was doing in the first 6 verses of chapter 12. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? Any other thoughts? Okay, then we'll go read another portion. This is verses 7 through 24. Would someone like to read verses 7 through 24? This is, you know, Jan's a great person, I was going to say, because she loves this stuff.
Okay, my Bible shows on the right side of the name of the king the word one. All the way down.
Okay.
Does anybody else have that, or should I?
Oh, yeah, it does. It does. Yes, it does. Mine does too.
So shall I read that, or just
but
assume
you-
that
you-
that one is speaking
No.
specifically?
No, you should go ahead and read it, but start in verse 7.
Yeah. These are the kings of the land that Joshua and the Israelites conquered on the west side of the Jordan, from Baal Gad to the valley of Lebanon, to Mount Halak, which rises toward Seir. Their lands Joshua gave as an inheritance to the tribes of Israel, according to their tribal divisions: the hill country, the western foothills, the Arabah, the mountain slopes, the desert and the Negev, the lands of the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. The king of Jericho, 1. The king of Ai, near Bethel, 1. The king of Jerusalem, 1. The king of Hebron, 1. The king of Yarmouth, 1. The king of Lachish, 1. The king of Eglon, 1. The king of Gezer, 1. The king of Debir, 1. The king of Geder, 1. The king of Hormah, 1. The king of Arad, 1. The king of Libnah, 1. The king of Adulam, 1. The king of Makkedah, 1. The king of Bet-El, 1. The king of Tappuah, 1. The king of Hepher, 1. The king of Aphek, 1. The king of Lasharon, 1. The king of Madon, 1. The king of Hazor, 1. The king of Shimron Meron, 1. The king of Ashaph, 1. The king of Taanach, 1. The king of Megiddo, 1. The king of Kadesh, 1. The king of Jokneam in Carmel, 1. The king of Dor in Naphoth Dor, 1. The king of Goim in Gilgal, 1. The king of Tirzah, 1. 31 kings in all.
Okay, thank you. Now that's got to be one of the more boring passages you've ever read, right? But if you go back again and you look at it, when he starts, first of all, he says right at the beginning, verse 7, these are the kings of the land that Joshua and the Israelites conquered on the west side of the Jordan. Okay? And then he says, from Baal Gad in the valley of Lebanon, well, Lebanon's way north, right? To Mount Halak, which rises towards Seir. Seir's Petra, so it's in the south. And then it has this big parenthetical thing. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is he's describing the kings. The kings, by the way, are nothing more than the rulers of the towns that are named here. So they're the king, it's the guy that ran the army, if you will. And so he starts listing them all. Now, again, if you were to be, like John says, a Bible nerd like me, you go back and you realize that verses 9 through 16 are all the stuff that's described in Joshua chapter 10. That's where they were busy taking the south, and it talked about how Joshua went out and had, I think there were 5 kings that got together and banded together and decided to come against him. And God had said, don't worry, Joshua, I've delivered them into your hands. And sure enough, they did. And he goes down and he cleans up all the south. And then if you go from verses 16 through 24, you'll find the names of the kings that are listed in Joshua chapter 11. Those are the ones in the north. And one of the reasons for fun with maps is a lot of times you can find these cities. He talks about Hazor. Here's the city of Hazor up here. And he talked about a bunch of names. When you're trying to do this on the fly, you often can't find, here's Aphek over here. And a lot of the names of these cities are on the map. So these are the lands that Joshua and the Israelites were conquering. And so all this is a listing of what cities he took, essentially. But there are some things we ought to notice here. At the end there it says 31 kings in all. So he took 31 cities. I'm sure there were some little villages and stuff out and around about that he probably took them anyway. I mean, there's a lot of times you can imagine in your mind there's probably villages in which these people lived, and they didn't know who was king of what city, and they didn't really care. Just leave us alone and let us tend our crops and our sheep. So I'm sure there was plenty of that kind of stuff going on. One of the things that I think is noteworthy is if you remember back from reading chapters 10 and 11, several times, God had said, I'm with you. I have given them into your hands. I've given you success. And so I wrote them down just so we could go look at them. If we go to chapter 10 again, and you look at verse 8, right toward the beginning, Yahweh said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you. Let me go to verse 11 in that same chapter. As they fled before Israel on the road down from Beth Horon to Azekah, Yahweh hurled huge hailstones down on them from the sky, and more of them died from the hailstones than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. Verse 30 in that chapter. Yahweh also gave that city and its king into Israel's hand. The city and everyone in it Joshua put to the sword. He left no survivors there, and he did to its king as he had done to the king of Jericho. Verse 12, I'm sorry, verse 32. Yahweh handed Lachish over to Israel, and Joshua took it on the second day. The city and everyone in it he put to the sword, just as he had done to Libnah. Then 42. All these kings and their lands Joshua conquered in one campaign because Yahweh, the God of Israel, fought for Israel. Yeah. Were you going to say something, John?
Yeah. So not in every case things didn't go swimmingly, did they?
Well, not in every case, but
Well,
often.
but why?
Beg your pardon?
Why didn't they go well?
Well, give me an example of one that didn't go well.
Well, they didn't follow, when they stopped following the instructions of Yahweh, it's conditional that Yahweh will be with you and help and conquer the nations if you follow my instructions.
Yep. Well, as the best example was the one that was before this, with
Right.
Achan.
Right,
Remember when God had told them, take no plunder, take nothing.
right.
And
I'm just-
Achan took a few things, and then they went after the next city and got their clock handed to them.
Right.
Yep.
I'm just saying, he's with you
Yep.
if you follow instructions. Like if you follow the Torah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. And we can also do the same thing, although I won't do it, I suppose. In chapter 11, there's verses that say the same thing. You know, God delivered them over into the hands. But it was because, it says several places in there, Joshua was careful to do exactly what God had told him and Moses. Exactly what you just said. When he was obedient, when he followed the instructions of God, he was successful. All right. Any thoughts about that? There's chapter 12. Like I say, who would have thought you could find something interesting in a list, a boring list of a bunch of kings' names? I thought that I might have a little extra time, so I thought we'd go into chapter 13 just a little ways. Next week, Ralphie can move on from something that's more fun. Actually, what happens now, essentially, is that we've listed the land that God has given to the Israelites. And starting in chapter 13, verse 8, it goes on and it talks about this particular bunch of land here he gave to this tribe. This particular bunch of land here he gave to this tribe. In other words, it goes on and talks about the land of Naphtali and Zebulun and Issachar and Gad and Manasseh. All of these tribes get their allotment starting in chapter 11, verse 9. But chapter 13, verse 9. There's an interesting thing in the first of chapter 13 I thought we might look at, and that is, given that we have a pretty thorough list of what God has given them, what they have taken, there's an example, there's what didn't he give them? And these first few verses in chapter 13 talk about that.
Should we read them?
Yeah, I'd like someone to read chapter 13 from the first verse through verse 7. Does anybody want to do that?
You want to read? Did you want to?
Now Joshua was old and stricken in years, and the Lord said unto him, Thou art old and stricken in years, and there remaineth yet very much land to be possessed. This is the land that yet remaineth, all the borders of the Philistines and the Geshuri, and from Shihor, from before Egypt, even unto the borders of Ekron, northward, which is counted to the Canaanite 5 lords of the Philistines, and Gasathites, and the Ashtorites, and the Eshkolante, and
You got to want to do that, don't you?
Yeah. And the Gittites, and the Ekronites, and the Avites from the south, and the land of the Canaanites, and the Merah, that is beside the Sidonians, unto Aphek, to the borders of the Amorites, and the land of the Gibeonites, and the Lebanon toward the sun rising from Baal-Gad under the Mount Hermon, unto the entering into Hamath, and the inhabitants of all the hill country from Lebanon unto Misrophoth, Miram, and all the Sidonians, them will I drive out from before the children of Israel. Only divide thou it by lot unto the Israelites for an inheritance, as I have commanded thee. Now therefore divide the land for the inheritance unto the 9 tribes and the half-tribe of Manasseh.
Okay, thanks. So just that little section there, let's ask some questions. So the first bunch of land, well, first of all, Joshua's old. Yes, John?
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry,
So
that's
these,
good.
these are, there's a lot of new names here, isn't there?
A lot of what?
New names?
Yep. Some of them we know.
I mean, in the Torah, it only talks usually about 7 of them, 7 of the ites. So these are, I'm guessing, subsets of these?
Well, some of them
Groups.
are the names of cities.
Oh, okay,
So they're the ites because they live in this city.
okay.
And-
But they may be considered part of the
Yep.
whatever.
Yep, and I want to,
Girgashans
there
or
are
something.
2 major parts that he's talking about. One, and this is, I think it's fun to kind of go talk about this. Well, this is not a particularly good map for this, but down here, here's, for example, Jerusalem is right here. So I want to talk about over here on the coast. Now, can you read the name of that city right there? That's Ashdod. Okay, Ashdod, it turns out, is actually a suburb of Tel Aviv.
I was just
Okay,
going to ask.
and if you go down the coast there, from Ashdod on down south, the cities you come to are
But that's-
Ashkelon, Gath, Ekron, and Gaza.
Is this south of Tel Aviv?
Yeah,
Okay.
south of Tel Aviv on the Mediterranean coast. Now, have you heard of any of those? Have you heard of Gaza, Ashkelon, Gath, or Ekron? Yeah, that's the Gaza Strip. And the people that lived down there were the Philistines. Okay? So that's one of the sections of land that they hadn't taken, was they often call it Philistia. It's that coastal section on the southwest part of Israel. Okay? Just saying. Who do we know that came from, for example, Gath? Goliath was from Gath. Okay? That's one section. The other section then he goes on and talks about, that's starting in the Sidonians. Now, in case you didn't know, Sidon is way up here. Go away. Not interested. Really, go away. Yes. Don't you hate this stuff? Just when you're trying to do something.
Just click outside it.
How do you get it to disappear?
Just click outside it. I bet it'll go
Okay.
away. There you go.
Here's Sidon up here. Sidon is it's a big city in Lebanon. It's Lebanon, if you will. And it talks about the Sidonians. So he also wanted the Israelites to have, it says, the land from the Sidonians as far as Aphek, which is somewhere down in here. I found it a while ago. It's down here somewhere. To the regions of the Amorites, the area of the Gabalites, and all Lebanon to the east, from Baal-Gad to Mount Hermon, or Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is right there. So it's all, see, Damascus is just right here. So Mount Hermon is this big mountain that's usually got snow on it all the time, and he wanted the Israelites to have all that land as well. But they didn't take it either. God says, I'm giving it to you, but you're old, Joshua, so tell the Israelites I'm giving it to them, go take it. So it's not recorded whether or not they did. Anyway, the point I wanted to make with all of that is that those two locations, even today, have remained a difficult part for Israel. The Gaza Strip, Philistia, has been a pain in Israel's side for years, right? Goliath and all kinds of stuff, to say nothing of the Gaza Strip today. And then this northern area of Lebanon and Syria, that's also been there's a place up here, this valley here that goes north from the Sea of Galilee is called the Hula Valley. And the Hezbollah sits up in these hills here and lobs mortar shells off down into this valley where there's all kinds of, I mean, it's a very heavily populated valley where the Israelis are growing stuff. And whenever there's any kind of a disturbance in northern Israel, that's always what they do. It's really a pretty bad thing. Yeah, John?
So I haven't read Joshua in a while, but you're suggesting that they pretty much stopped at this point. Is that what you're saying? That
Well, it says that God says, I myself will drive them out. But as near as I can tell, it's not clear. I don't find any record of when that happened. I think
well, it's I will if you.
exactly. I think it was going to happen if the Israelites had continued
Well,
in
that's
the
my-
manner of Joshua.
So that's
But I
my
don't
question.
think-
I haven't read Joshua in a while.
Yeah,
Did they just?
I think they kind of left it as a detail to be handled by later generations, and it never got handled. That's my opinion.
Okay.
That's my opinion. Mark?
So the reason for the problem from that part of the land is they didn't do what they were supposed to do.
Exactly, exactly. If they had followed God's command, they would have cleaned it up and done what He had wanted them to do, and they wouldn't have had that. And what did God say about that? He says, if you don't completely wipe out these people, they'll be a thorn in your side and they'll cause your destruction. And that's exactly what they did.
3,000-year-old mistake.
Yep, 3,000-year-old mistake.
But I'm sorry to interrupt it.
That's okay.
I just don't understand then, and maybe again that's just ignorance of not rereading the book. But they're smashingly successful so far.
Mm-hmm.
Did they just get bored, or it just doesn't say?
It just doesn't say.
Okay.
One of the things that kind of surprised me, and I haven't had time to look into it much, is that, you know, in chapter 13 here, God goes to Joshua and says, you're getting old. You're kind of old now, you know? And we should go back and kind of calculate how old Joshua really is. I mean, we can do some of it right here as we talk. When did we first meet Joshua?
He was Moses' helper.
Yeah, he was
He went into the
RHM,
land.
we call that, right-hand man. He was Moses' right-hand man way back at the beginning when they were coming out of Egypt, right? Joshua was one of the ones, he was the two of the, beg your pardon? Well, yeah. When he was an RHM, he's got to be at least 25 or so. And then so he went through the whole 40 years of wilderness experience, so that makes him 65 or so. And then it doesn't really say how long a lot of this stuff in the conquering of the tribes went. It talks about the southern, that southern thing went pretty quick, but the northern thing doesn't tell you exactly how long that happened. Yeah, Mark?
So when he is the right-hand man, his name is Salvation. But because he was faithful as a right-hand man, his name gets changed to the Salvation of Yahweh.
Salvation of God. That's good. That's good. You know, I haven't even looked ahead myself. It may say at the end how old Joshua was when he died. I don't remember. But in any case, yeah.
Sorry, I see the correlation a lot in other places with kings and people. For instance, here I would say, in his passing, he's getting old. So there not now a strong leader? So everything goes downhill. You know, there's not that enthusiastic front person, that type of thing. We see it later on with the kings. You had a king, he followed the commandments, everything was all right, and then you had a king who threw him out, everything went downhill. I mean,
there's that, and there's even a more interesting kind of a conclusion. What's the book after Joshua? Judges. Judges covers a several hundred year period of time when essentially Israel was not ruled by anyone, if you will. Each tribe was kind of on their own. It was like the United States before the federal government got created. And so they were all out kind of doing their own thing, you know, and so it was...
Sounds like a good thing to me.
Yeah. It was not until, the end of Judges that they actually had one leader for the nation of Israel. So that factors in that too. Any other thoughts or comments about that? Yes? Does that what it says? 110, I thought it probably said that, I just hadn't gone through to read that.
What
So if he
verse?
was 110 when he died, and he had to be at least probably 65 or 70 when he went into the promised land, because, you know, so. Just a kid, 65 or 70.
Isaac was
110 is an early death for these guys, right? So that means there's 40 years between the time he went into Israel, the time they started, you know, let's say conquered Jericho, and the time he died. And so we don't know how much time the conquering of a bunch of these cities took, but it's bound to take a few years. Yeah. So anyway, fun, huh? Any other final thoughts? I'll close with prayer. Father God, I just thank you for your word. I thank you for your Torah, and I thank you for how much we can learn. Sometimes you have to kind of dig and talk about it with each other to learn what's going on, but that's, I'm convinced, the way you designed it. So I just ask that you'd keep us on the track, keep us on the path, help us to remain excited about your word, and to learn the things that you have for us in it. In Yahushua's name, amen. Okay, sure.
What's next?
Okay, in about, 30 minutes, we'll start the, let's see, we'll start the main service.